live. And we're live. All right, so this is another episode on the Ibn Arabi Book Club.
Mm-hmm.
And I find these couple pages 50 through 55, actually pretty interesting, considering how I've been thinking recently. Something that actually stood out in the reading, which kind of reminded me of Dante's Inferno,
Mm.
which was kind of like a very ironic kind of understanding. I'm trying to see if I can find it real quick. I don't know if I can. Well, I can't find it right now, but basically it was how the properties have to correspond to the level. So this reminded me of like Dante's Inferno, where you got, the different levels of hell, but how each level of hell have a certain quality, right? Like these are the people that are, gluttonous, and these are the people that are, so and so. So it
Mm-hmm.
actually had a very reminiscent Dante-esque correlations where like with every level there's a specific quality that is
Mm-hmm.
experienced, and you can kind of you can kind of travel through those levels, it seems like. I don't know, but I found that actually very helpful for me to think uh, this kind of section here.
Yeah. Um, that's a very interesting analogy, interesting connection. Uh, Something that stands out to me is what the names do. So each attribute, each level of hell, if you will, uh, is connected to. It's described by a name, and that name actually that maybe you can say also attached to the quality. But the name of the level, the name of the attribute is kind of possesses the people or the beings that are in that name, that are at that level. So and they are experiencing that quality, or they are revealing that quality. So in that sense, a name is kind of like a, a law, or the thing that they're captured by. So for example, the physical bodies are captured by the on when they are on a planet like this, they are of a certain size, they are captured or they are explained by the Newtonian laws of physics. So they can't escape that Newton's laws kind of possess them in a sense. And people who are gluttonous, they are possessed by the laws of gluttony. People who are liars, they are possessed by the laws of deception and dishonesty. And they are at the same time, they're revealing the qualities of gluttony, the qualities of lying. uh, they're bringing certain qualities into the world, but at the same time they are being captured, and they're being like explained or they're being within the laws, the names, the nomos is the law, the governing principle. The governing principle is kind of keeping them within the range of the name. To me, that was really interesting, that the names are actually referring to that, the quality, but also the reason why beings are confined within a quality and they don't switch from one quality to another quality is because they are remaining subjects to a law. They're remaining subjects to whatever law that is, the law of that level of hell. So the name is doing something to them. The name has a relationship with them. And that relationship is not just a relationship of description. It's a relationship of possession. It's like when you're born, when a child is born and the child is given a name by their parents. That name is doing something to the child. The child is growing up and being kind of regulated by the name that they're given.
So it's like, because it does go synonymous here in the section here about relationship. It's like a relationship. Um, it's funny how I guess like Chittick is always reminding us not to think of it as entities, because it's very easy to fall into the
Mm.
idea of it being entities. And I caught myself kind of slipping into it a little bit sometimes, just the way Ibn Arabi kind of describes it. But I did like the idea how he describes it as these levels, these names, they are intelligible qualities, which I thought was such a good description. But also at the same time, what's very important to understand is that these names cannot be intelligible until, like, it went through, like, it cannot be intelligible till we can realize that the relationship is intelligible. But it's also dependent on the fact that the cosmos is intelligible. So we have to intelligibilize the cosmos and then proceed all the way down to understand the name, which I think it actually does propose in the section that somebody can be possessed by the name and not realize the name that they are under. And this includes the section where Ibn Arabi does this interesting part, which I've never seen him do, where he responds to hypothetical objections.
Right.
And I thought that was actually very interesting because I've never seen him do that before. These hypothetical objections that he's responding to, especially answering like, well, how can somebody not know the name? Or is it they're at fault for, because like, how can they escape the name when they're being possessed by the name and the name is greater than them and so on? I do like one objection where he's talking about that. He says that actually ignorance has nothing to do with existence. Ignorance is a complete non-existent thing. So it's actually not a name. Having ignorance is not a name. It's actually part of non-existence. So it's somehow like, I guess, our sole responsibility to become aware of the name that we're being possessed by. And from what I understand, if I'm understanding correctly, if you become aware, you intelligibilize the name. And that means that you have the ability to, I guess, overcome that level, paradoxically. I think that's how I understood it, but I don't know.
Let's say someone has some gifts, some intellectual or physical gifts. Let's say they have the potential to be an amazing dancer. And that is in them, that is in the form of a potential, and they are ignorant of it. And that ignorance is something that, according to Ibn Arabi, that person is responsible for. It is unlike the divine names. The divine names come from God, come from the bigger picture of the cosmos, and we have a share of that. Like we have a little bit. Somebody who's a great dancer or potentially a great dancer have a share of that physical movement, that's skill or quality. But the fact that they are ignorant of it, the fact that it is in their unconscious, let's say, the fact that it is in their unconscious and they're not relating to the unconscious in the right way, they're not connecting with it, they're not in dialogue with the unconscious, they're not sensitive to things that come from their unconscious, that is up to them. So it seems like ignorance is not a thing. It's a way of being out of sync. It's a way of being detached from things that you have or you have access to. And I kept remembering at the passages that you're referring to, I kept remembering the concept of the unconscious. And I think Ibn Arabi would understand what we mean by the unconscious, by certain names being in our unconscious.
Michelle.
Hi, Michelle. Yeah, Michelle.
No, but I really like that. I really like that the unconscious, because in many ways, the way we describe the unconscious even today is that the unconscious is actually greater than us because we are constantly unaware of how it controls us, how we respond.
And we can be possessed by it. The more we are unconscious of a desire, of an urge, the less we understand, the more we are owned by it, the more we are possessed by it. And the more our behavior is predicted by the laws that govern that unconscious desire. So when become aware, when we become relatively more aware, more understanding of ourselves, what we are, who we are, we can be liberated.
Yeah, and I think Ibn Arabi would agree with that, because I really do like how he made that important distinguishment. That because I was going through the same logic. I was like, well, if you're saying that we're ignorant, well, then isn't ignorance would be a name then, and that we're possessed by ignorance? And he's like, no, he's like, no, ignorance is something completely non-existent. So it's almost like I almost started entertaining the idea that actually this idea between non-existence and existence, if realizing the name is to be existent, that means that already we're starting from a position of non-existent, obviously, at least I think from Ibn Arabi's point of view. But
Mhm.
it's interesting because the framework that we usually have in a traditional, or you could say our cultural understanding that we exist and so on, but it he's already provoking the idea that no, it actually takes a lot of work to have existence, to feel existence. Um,
Right. It takes a lot of work to be in sync with being, to be in sync with existence, with what is already here. I realize I can also we can extend that Newtonian laws analogy. We can say, just like you said, the laws of motion, Newton's laws of motion are not things. They are not things. They are similar to names. They are laws that govern movements or try to describe the way things move. Similar, I mean, continuing that way of thinking, our ignorance of Newton's laws are also not things. They are a kind of absence. They are a kind of absence that disconnect us from how things move, how physical things move. So, knowing there's a difference between knowing the laws of motion, being able to describe and understand how physical objects move in this world, in our world, and not knowing. And that the difference between those two conditions is not about something new existing. It's about the knower, the person, kind of reorienting, um, knowing more names. It's
mhm.
difficult to describe that.
No, I think you're getting something there because in the text it talked about how it would be confusing if we didn't know any direction to turn to. So as and I keep forgetting also is that these names have a sort of hierarchy, and that the higher you go, the more inclusive they become. And that when we start talking about a law or like basically the all-inclusive name or like the essence,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's basically every direction, everywhere you turn is the face of Allah, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I do think not only is it important, at least from what Ibn Arabi is saying about having this understanding the relationship, becoming more aware of the relationship that you're in under the name, but also which orientation, what is the orientation that it is dragging you, which I think you're pointing at too, is that this orientation of direction is very important, which I think will also kind of bring into talk now about the divine conflict,
Mm-hmm.
because it did propose the idea of like being called by another name but not obeying a specific name, and that's because you're being like sort of pulled
Mm-hmm.
by this other name. And I still think actually the unconscious is still definitely beneficial to kind of use this, where I feel like I experienced in my own life that I am doing something and yet somehow my body is reacting the opposite, right? Is going in a completely different direction than I want it to go.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I wonder if these problems, philosophical problems about conflict, are more problematic because of the discussion being theological, Because everything is related to God, then conflict, you have to really make sense of it. If there's no God, if you don't have to include God in your philosophical scheme, then sure, yeah, conflict. Yeah, great. What else do you expect? Do you expect like perfect harmony? But it becomes really puzzling, really problematic when you have God and everything is God is everything. And all the names, putting aside ignorance and absence, but all names are divine names. And then when we have to also accept that some of these divine names, for example, anger, vengeful, merciful, forgiving, those are both sets of names, both refer to divine names. And so here's one way to understand it for me. I understand it through the metaphor of painting. So let's say as a painter, you work with colors. And how do you understand colors? How do you relate to colors? How do you put yourself in a position to really appreciate a color? You use contrast. So you put blue next to yellow or red next to green. Or you find that to really see green, you have to put it next to red, something like that. So to really understand forgiveness, you need that other conflicting name too. If you only have forgiveness, then forgiveness itself doesn't have any meaning. So that's one way to understand it for me. I don't think it's the only possible way. I'm sure people make sense of it in different ways, like, okay, just trust God or just trust that the universe has to be perfect. But given that knowing is high in the hierarchy, is knowing is more important than desiring, more important than power, being powerful. And to know things, you need to know opposites, or know how qualities relate to each other, how qualities stand in relation to each other in time, how one thing turns to another thing, how anger turns into forgiveness, for example. So uh, that's that's my way of thinking about conflict so far.
Yeah, I think no, I like that. I do like the painting example because that actually puts it in a nice contrast.
Sure.
But no, there's a passage where it talked about how to make things beautiful. This is kind of like a command to make things beautiful, and I think your painting example is kind of knowing. I want to say that actually artists kind of know the order and the hierarchy almost implicitly, how they want to do their painting in such a way that they want to express certain areas and contrast in here and there, or make absences or presences here and there.
Mhm.
So they do know, and the whole aim is to make it beautiful. So it's almost like, in order to resolve this conflicting thing, and I'm trying to find the passage, but it was basically like talking about how can you have this debate or discussion, but how can you have something conflicting and make it beautiful?
Mhm.
Um, and I think that already shows like a sort of, the way I interpret this is there has to be obviously an implied refraining, like just not a, you can have, for example, I think it's fair to have anger, but then also to have fairness at the same time. And I think in order to have fairness, you can be angry and still practice fairness, but that's by pulling back on your anger, sort of realizing its order in your judgment, in the
Mhm.
role of your judgment, realizing its
Mhm.
place in its judgment, that it is actually a perfectly viable thing to be angry and still be fair.
Yeah. Yeah. And in fact, your fairness becomes more valuable, more significant if you are angry.
Mhm.
It stands in sharper contrast. In sharper, what's the word people use usually? Sharper relief. I think. I'm really glad you referred to that invitation to be beautiful, because that the way I read that passage, I think it's from the Quran that is quoted in Ibn Arabi. Uh, God is asking the prophet, be beautiful when you enter into conflict. Some Muslims might for example, or some Christians, some Muslim might think, why not everybody in the world is Muslim? Why can't everybody be Muslim? Or Christians might ask, why can't everybody be Christian? So here, God in the Quran is kind of suggesting, or maybe this is my interpretation, like you are going to have conflict. You're going to be different from other people. That's inevitable. So when you encounter someone who disagrees with you, or when you see someone who doesn't have your faith, enter into a disagreement with them. Don't try to force an agreement, but do the disagreement beautifully. Try to enter into a conflict that is aesthetically, trying to reach some standards of beauty, as opposed to just a crude clash of forces. The Muslim army is stronger than the Christian army, or vice versa. That has, I think, ethical implications for, okay, let's not deny, because it's part of the conflicts are part of even the divine nature has conflicts within it. The world has conflicts. You can't delete them. It's not an artifact. It's not an accident. It's not something that will go away tomorrow.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Yeah, I would say that, ironically, that is the most difficult thing to do. And it's actually something that I've been thinking about recently, because I read this one Bible verse, and it kind of hit me in the sense of, like, it said something like, Jesus said something like, even the sinners can treat other people good that treat them well, right? But it takes a whole nother type of person to treat somebody well that has treated you poorly.
Mm-hmm.
And I started thinking about this, and I was like, wow, I mean, actually a lot of our culture is predicated on that very fact. Like, it's like the whole saying, like, you get respect if you give me respect, and all this kind of like famous sayings. And I kept thinking, like, if we're always thinking like this, when do we ever actually have a time or a practice to actually be good to somebody that has treated us horribly? And I had reflected a lot on this, because I had, started to think that actually I have been behaving in such a transactional way. And I think this whole idea of acting beautifully with conflict is to not almost act in such a transactional way. Because if you do act in a transactional way, then all you're going to have is just ugly conflict.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I thought, that gave me a lot of thought recently.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I heard there are some forms of martial arts. You're probably more familiar with this, including one of them is Aikido. And people who train Aikido learn about the martial arts at a high level. It's about not fighting to win. It's about fighting with someone you care about. You care deeply about your opponent. And the way you fight, the way you embody the art form of engaging with an opponent has to be combined with caring about them, caring about all life, and including yourself. So you're expressing in the act of war, in the act of doing something, protecting yourself, resisting force. You are at the same time enacting care. You're showing that you care, even for the person who is opposed to you. And that's, I think, when we learn to do things like that, we become sources. We become origin points. And people like remember, like, oh yeah, I was an asshole in the past, but finally I met a guy, or I met a woman, and they didn't treat me the same way I was treating them. They just interrupted the pattern, and I was suddenly introduced to something else, something completely different, a new kind of principle. I was like, oh, if the kind of discourse about respect that you talked about, that's very familiar to us. Like, if you want respect, show people that you want respect, and they learn it from you. It's like training dogs, Yeah. But there are other names, there are other attributes, other principles that we can be governed by. And people, somebody who shows the strength of character to not swear back to someone who's like cursing them, they are showing a stability. They're relying on a hidden principle, a principle that is hidden to most people. That's kind of relying on. And I wonder, is it possible to have such strong character without religion? Like, I know you are also thinking about this, like the necessity of religion. Like one of the things that I keep thinking about, like if I want to really have strength of character, I need certain principles to rely on, so I won't be so damn reactive to everyone. So I don't end up mirroring everybody's action. Like if they respect me, I respect them back. If they don't respect me, I don't respect them, and so on and so forth. If I want to have my own reliable source of action in the world, is there any other way than believing in some kind of divine source, divine attributes? Then I can just rely on those attributes and say, okay, I'm relating to these. I don't know.
So it's kind of ironic that you bring this up now, because this has been a lot of my thinking recently that I've probably only shared with like Daniel and Michelle. But a lot of my current arguments for like a perennialist kind of like philosophy is it has to do with predisposition and receptivity, capacity. So the way that you entertain it, I would say that actually it is possible.
Mm.
It is possible. And that's also mainly because I also conceive of Buddhism as an atheism. So taking that into account, it is possible, but it's from the way I would take it is that it's definitely not for everybody. But if it is in correspondence with your receptivity and like spiritual predisposition, then I think I would say it's actually possible. And that's actually like the position that I'm in.
Mm-hmm.
Because even within specific denominations or religions themselves, everybody has specific gradations and qualms that, for example, like most believers probably have a very minimal approach. Like, let me just go to church. Let me just pray. Like that, for them, that is within their capacity. Now, are they being honest about themselves about that capacity? Probably not. They probably could do more. But for some, that probably is all that they can do. And I think there are others that actually can go completely rogue and
Mm-hmm.
have like a spiritual attainment. But
Mm-hmm.
I think the main problem that I have is that when this kind of rogueness becomes universal,
Mm-hmm.
that's when it becomes really dangerous. And I think I like to cite Carl Jung as the example for this, where going rogue has its dangers because it implies not everybody is capable of doing it. And I want to say that Carl Jung, he did it, but it was very dangerous for him still. But it's possible. And that's like, that's my position. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you know,
So there is a passage. Let me try to link back what you said to the text here. There's a passage here that the title is personification. I believe it is the personification of the names. So from a religious point of view, there are these names that they come into reality. They reveal themselves, but they don't depend on us. So if you try to embody a principle like principle of charity or hope, charity, love, these high principles, high values that we want to personify. From a religious standpoint, we believe that these exist before us in an abstract way, maybe in part of reality that is hidden, but we bring it into view, we bring it into our lives, into our finite lives. Without religion, it becomes for me more mysterious. Like, okay, so where is it? Where does it start? The names, the names before they are personified, did they exist in some way before? Is there a spiritual domain where they exist? And for Carl Jung, he did, for the names for Carl Jung might be archetypes: the child, the mother, the prophet, the magician, trickster. So these are names, like they could be mapped onto a kind of religious system. He used a different language, but he did use them, and he did say that they do exist in the psyche, in the collective psyche, in our unconscious. So he did explain a way of existing before they become personified, before these names become personified. So if we want to have a comprehensive metaphysical system for how we are living, I think, I don't know, maybe it's not necessary, but it seems necessary to say what happens before these characteristics become personified. What was there before? Where did these names come from? Names, archetypes, principles, characteristics. A perennialist philosophy or perennial philosopher, do they take full credit for them? I don't think they will. It's like, this is me. I'm reinventing charity. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think so. I'm really trying to prevent like a cheap perennialism where people just kind of throw their hands up and go, "Well, oh, our religions are the same." So like me and Daniel have talked about this, and it's like, no, it's a costly perennialism, meaning I think there is actually a case for this in the text because it talks about levels and there's hierarchies of levels and how
Mhm.
every level has an intelligible quality. So that means for every ontology, you have to match the corresponding epistemology. The danger, the kind of like a lot of the wariness that I propose when we try to think on the same when we're on the same level of ontology, but trying to provoke a new epistemology, is that my case is that we actually have to be on the other level of ontology to start actually entertaining what that epistemology is. That's like a lot of my like grievances, especially with like people coming up with new religions, is that
Yeah.
for me it's like it's not about like debating what's wrong with the epistemology. It's about trying to match the ontology with the epistemology. And if there is a claim of a higher ontology, we have to entertain the idea of actually rising to that ontology and matching a corresponding epistemology with every level. Um, and I think me and Daniel have talked a lot about this, how each
Mhm.
epistemology and ontology has to match together.
Mhm.
And I think, again, I think that's like the whole Sufi aspect of like there is this knowable God, but then there's like that unknowable God, because really at the pinnacle of God, there is a specific ontology and epistemology that only he has. And so there is always going to be that aspect of just like, well, I don't have that connection with being because I am not being.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And actually, that unknowable aspect is extremely important for its consequence regarding hierarchy. So, insofar as God is knowable to at the highest level, uh, the qualities of divine qualities are at the highest level, and all other forms of being are trying to reach that. They are at lower, decreasing, or relatively lower stations. But that all assumes that the divine nature is knowable. If we assume that the divine nature is unknowable, there's unknowability to that, then everything becomes equal. It's all equal, like the believers, non-believers, beautiful things, non-beautiful things. From that perspective, in relation to the unknowable God, everything is equal. There's no degrees anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Even though there are, there's the other side, the knowable side, that we can divide things in terms of degrees, not just kind. But yeah, it's important to hold on to that unknowable aspect of God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, what's interesting is like I've noticed that whatever proposition we take, and you alluded to this, and I think almost like proposition would be like accepting a name. Whatever proposition we accept, whether we accept God exists or God doesn't exist, is that it all comes with its own problems. Like you had pointed out, like, if you accepted a God theology, then conflict actually becomes a really puzzling thing, which makes sense because actually the whole like underlying drama is like good and evil, right? So like conflict is like the whole drama.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is the most puzzling thing. But then it's like if you accept another kind of metaphysical principle, then like you're right. Conflict is like, yeah, it just happens. But then another problem arises, which then that's something that is like the ultimate grappling hook. So I guess there's like a metaphysical Pascal Pences, like if you accept this, then you get this. If you don't accept this, then you get this.
Yeah.
But we can't deny that we're both wagering something at some point. We're both wagering some kind of. We're almost accepting like some type of like metaphysical problem to die on, to solve. Like it's to me, it's like it's inevitable that whatever orientation you put yourself in, you're going to have some kind of conflict to solve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And earlier, is that related to? It sounds related to me, but is it related to that ontological state? You said you have to occupy an ontological position that corresponds to our epistemology. So, but do you mean by that a form of life? Like, in order to know certain things, you have to live a certain way. Like you can't continue if you're a CEO of a company and you try to just get rich. You can't like get into Sufism and know the Sufi path. You have to change the way you live in order to know the world, to know reality in a way that you want.
Yeah, that is like kind of like that's kind of like basically what I'm saying, because I think actually, like for example, I think trying to understand saints without actually having some type of like ontological practice living, it would be actually very difficult, and actually it can be dangerous because you can actually misunderstand them completely, and it can be harmful to society. So it's like, and that's why I take the side of like receptivity, predisposition, because it's granted that everybody can become saints. Not everybody can do this. But yeah, I do kind of like take the position that that there is like you have to sort of like be in that way of being to begin to entertain knowing, because I think the way that we have it now is like we get the danger of having too much abstraction and not enough ontological participation.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and still for most people, religion in our time, religion is mostly about doctrine and statements.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, absolutely. It's actually very ironic because it's like church, religious life, it is all about ontological practice, and yet a lot of people care about is only protecting their creeds. Like that's it. That's all they feel like protecting. They don't actually focus on like praying and like all the sacraments and everything like that. They just talk about like, oh no, are you Catholic? Well, we don't believe in sola scriptura. Something I realized I learned. I didn't know that was a problem in
Mm-hmm.
Christian denomination, but that's a big problem apparently.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I had no idea until recently that in Iran, Ibn Arabi is not as popular because he is Sunni. He's
What?
not Shia. Yeah, I was like, who cares? Like he's one of the greatest philosophers of the Muslim world. Like, are you really gonna get hung up on the fact that he belongs to a different branch of your religion? Yeah, they do. They do. Even like Rumi, I believe Rumi was also a Sunni. So in some people, in some cities, in some religious cities in Iran, you know, like, okay, he's overrated. It's ridiculous.
But actually, even if you say like even if you say like he's Sunni, like even the traditional Muslims that I was talking to, and I would bring up Ibn Arabi, they're like, "Oh no, 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 that's it's such a dangerous like road for most people." And now I kind of understand why it's dangerous, I guess, because like a very naive Muslim could fall into
Hmm.
like believing in like these multiplicities of like entities or something. He could
Yeah.
make he could make that move without realizing it. Or he could explain it incorrectly and cause a lot of like problems for himself in the community and so on. But um, yeah, it's always surprising to me that most people want to stay within uh, that lane, that specific name. Oh, I'm Sufi. Oh,
Yeah.
oh, I'm Shia and so on. Um, but
Yeah.
actually, it's funny because looking at the text, I actually looked at this like the names as like several religions, and being called by another name would be like almost being tempted to convert, convert to another name. Um,
Hmm.
and I realized um, that this was an interesting way to look at it because when you go into another name, like the same way you go into another religion, you have to actually pick up the properties, the effects of that very religion itself. You have to, if I go into Hinduism at the start, chanting and start, all these types of meditation and stuff. And I found that very fascinating when I started thinking about like a sort of meta understanding of how these religions would function. Is that
Hmm.
there are people that start to realize and they start to struggle with their own religious life because they start being called by something else.
Interesting. Yeah. Um, it's it. It could be people could relate to their religion, in a way that focuses on themselves. Like, I insist on being, for example, if I insist on being a Shia Muslim, and then I insist on that position being the correct one, or the best one, or I regard myself as one of the chosen people. But that's just that puts too much emphasis on me and on my part of the reality. But if I instead focus on the world, the cosmos, what is being expressed in the cosmos, how God is expressing himself through all these varieties, then I don't have to keep changing myself to experience all the different colors. I can just love the different people, different religions, believers, non-believers. They all become special to me because they all become manifestations of that. And it's not just about me. So like, oh, that sounds good. Let me join them. And we have those temptations now, because now we live in a very individualistic culture. There's the only way to taste something is to take up that identity, to to see life through that perspective. We can't just love the other. You can't just love the Sunnis or love the Buddhists, or uh, without becoming them. You know,
Mm-hmm.
in some ways, the culture, our culture gives us a very difficult task of being too much. Every time I see my some of my friends in that I have in Toronto, every time I meet them in person, right before we reach each other, they are listening to some podcasts, because they want to just be everything. They want to learn everything and know everything and be informed, like have lots of food for thought. So they until that last moment when they're meeting somebody else, they're still listening to, I don't know, Joe Rogan or whatever. whatever the fashionable podcast is, but that's too much. I think that the other option is to just be where we are and love others. Uh, here's a passage. I think you already touched on this passage. Um, it's a passage from Ibn Arabi. He writes at the bottom of the left side of page 55, uh, last paragraph on the left side. He says, "You should know that the divine call includes believer and non-believer, and unbeliever, obedient and disobedient. This call derives only from the divine names. One divine name calls to someone who is governed by the property of a second divine name when it knows that the term of the second name's property within the person has to come to an end." So it's the acknowledgement of the differences within a life, difference between lives, and recognizing that they all have a divine source.
Yeah. No, I really liked your, your you're saying like we assume we have to taste all the colors, and I agree. Actually, I am actually of the position that if you take your religion far enough, you would actually see that universality. And one
Mm-hmm.
example is actually like Christianity has the universality in it. It talks about how from the very first command you have to love God with all your might, all your soul, whatever, and then the second command is love your neighbor. So it's
Mm.
already predicated that if you love God so much that you would love your neighbor, that actually the conflict would become beautiful, that all the differences that maybe you don't even comprehend or understand would still become beautiful. And so it's more like taking, and this is why I'm like so, enthusiastic about like ontological participation, because if people just took their religion far enough
Mm-hmm.
to the very pinnacle, if they tried at least for the very pinnacle, and it's basically not, and it's basically just doing good, loving, loving your neighbor and stuff like that, that they would understand, they would know that um, these differences almost melt away. Like
Mm-hmm.
they are difference. There are differences, and they are irreconcilable for a reason. They have to be irreconcilable because if not, then what's the point of loving somebody that is easy to love? What's the whole point of that? Differences have to be almost to the point of irreconcilability because the challenge is to love a human being, another human being specifically.
Mm-hmm.
So, you have to assert difference. And for
Mm-hmm.
me, that assertion of difference is actually the universality itself, which is kind of like the costly parentalism that I've been talking about, where most people talk about like, it's all the same. So, but it's like, no, 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 no. These differences matter for sure. There's a reason why people can't be, there's a reason why somebody cannot just be a Muslim and go to a Christianity. There's a reason why, Hindu, it's hard for a Hindu to go into being, a Buddhist or whatever the case. There's reasons why it's difficult to have those conversions or whatever. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and it's because the challenge of the conflict, it's really the
Mm-hmm.
challenge of the conflict. You
Mm-hmm.
have to love the conflict. You have to make it beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's that invitation to take it far enough. That's very different from just giving up from the get-go and say, okay, so that's just there's no difference. They're all equal, so I'm going to do nothing. So I'm going to take none of the paths because they all lead the same way. But actually, the the path is to, or the method is to take one path, one particular path, and then realize that which path you chose is of secondary importance. But it is about taking that path far enough, going with it, sticking with it. I'm reminded, as you were talking, I was reminded of the, the author. It was, I think, William Chittick's advisor or professor. His name is Nasr. Uh, I forgot his first name. Sayyid Hussein Nasr.
Yeah, Hussein Nasr, yeah.
He talks about religion in a similar way that you do, that religions have a common nature. For example, he says all major religions have something like sainthood. Even though they look different, they do different practices, but they produce these special kinds of people, people who are extremely devoted and they have certain quality, they exhibit very special qualities. And people can recognize saints when you are in the presence of a saint or read the writings of a saint. There's something distinct about them. They are products of particular paths. Different paths can lead to them, but they do need a path. It's not like, okay, so because you can take different paths, again, I'm repeating myself, that you don't have to. No, it's necessary. Paths are the very fact that we can get into a path, that itself is significant, even though we can agree that which path is not as important.
Mhm.
Yeah.
No, I think you phrased it perfectly, because it's like I've been trying to figure out how to phrase it to where it's not like, yeah, just everything is just up for grabs, everything is from the same source.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's the path is secondary. A lot of people debate over the right path, but it's the path. The path is secondary, but it's about taking the path far enough. Because, for example, and I think, well, first of all, I think this text has been really capitalizing on this, right? Because Ibn Arabi
Mm-hmm.
talks about perfect man and how perfect man actually, there can be a multiplicity of perfect men, but they all have different individualities, different personalities under different names.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is a perfect example of, like, in our culture, nobody has a problem with a Buddhist that has taken Buddhism so far enough that it becomes basically like Buddha. Actually, that amazes us when we come across a person like this. Even if we're not Christian, even if we are Christian or Muslim, we're like, wow, this guy is so wise and he's so, like, amazing. And even
Mm-hmm.
Christians today, I would say they don't even have a problem with Buddha. The things that he says are like, yeah, yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
I would say even the saints, if I would say if Muslims knew about a lot of saints, they probably wouldn't have much of a problem with them either.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting when there's somebody that goes so far enough in the religion at such a high state of being that we can look at it, and yet this person didn't convert, right? Like Rumi says very universalistic messages, and yet he's still a Muslim,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's amazing to me. He still maintains the difference. He doesn't convert to anything. He maintains that he's a Muslim still.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think that's what's really fascinating, is that these are people that really got to know the name that they're under, rather than constantly have this superficial, like, defending of their creed, or simply uh defending their identity. It's a lot of defending their identity but not becoming their identity.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of the problem, is that you're defending your identity but you don't even know how to become your identity.
Yeah. Yeah. At some point, that path, if you take that path, as you said, long enough, if you stay with it for long enough time, then we reach a point where the distinction between the person and the path starts to fade. The person becomes the path. So Rumi, for example, he was a very responsible source. So he would sit around with his friends, and I'm sure he felt responsible. He was giving. And he was like, every time he said something, every time he said, recited one of his poems for the first time, he extended the path a little bit further. So it's like the path continued with him. And people now continue the Rumi path, and maybe some of them will continue a few steps afterwards. So the person stays with the path, so uh, they can find themselves in the path. It's like, where am I here? Where is my place going to be? And who am I going to meet along this path? The path is alive. And that's one of my, to be honest with you, that's one of my major motivations to be to join Islam again because I feel like it's been so stagnant compared to other religions. I mean, it has representatives that try to keep it alive, but as a whole, as a community, it can really use more people who don't distinguish paths and people. It needs more individual paths. Yeah, but it's just all the contingent historical factors.
It's almost the same reason why I almost feel like I'm like on the verge of dedicating myself to like a specific Christian denomination. I'm like on the
Hmm.
verge of it because it feels almost like very important that I almost do like this return home
Hmm.
to my original religion, but at the same time, in such a drastic manner that, because I've never seen Christianity the way I see it now, and it's really enlightening, and a lot of that has to do with like the way I grappled with Islam, which became really important, and how my whole experiences consumed me with, uh, you know, trying to defend these creeds or having a good justification for a creed or another. And it still fascinates me that people still spend so much time defending and obsessing over like this creeds and so on. It's like, my God.
Hmm.
I'm just like, my God, really? Like, you really want
Hmm.
to spend that much time doing that? Are you like that afraid?
Hmm.
And it's like almost, I imagine it's someone like actually finally deciding, yeah, I'm gonna stay on this path, but then they just stay there and they keep advertising like this is why you should pick this path, but they've never traveled the path.
Hmm. Hmm. It's really amazing how this is what you're talking about is a perfect example of how we are prone to miss the point in what we are doing. Like we engage with religion, but we miss the point of religion. And it's not unique to religion. We engage with philosophy, and we might miss the point of philosophy. We engage with science, we miss the point of science. We engage with, whatever it is, art, miss the point. There's so many ways of missing the point. This itself is really amazing as a human quality, as a human and tendency, the human tendency to do something, to join something, and yet miss the point. It's like, be so passionate, and yet like doing something irrelevant. Yeah, my cat is. Yeah,
I think, yeah, go ahead.
I was just talking about my cat. It's like we have a theory about him nowadays. We think that he believes that I'm talking with him when I'm at the computer and talking, recording a video or doing a live chat. So he's like doesn't want me to talk by myself. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say like, yeah, that the it's this, the idea of the path is that, oh man, the thought has left me.
Yeah, yeah. It will come back to you. It will come back to you. I want to talk before I forget about this return home theme,
Hmm.
which is really interesting. I don't think it's arbitrary to say, okay, I'm gonna go somewhere. I'm gonna, I have all these options. I'm gonna go back, return to my home, the first religion that I experienced. I think this is similar to changing your name and then going back to your first name. Like, let's say I changed my name to, I don't know, Dustin or Eric, and then after the midpoint of my life, I start to realize I hear my name, and I feel like, when I hear that name, that my original name, my whole body vibrates in a way that no other name can do because I heard it so early in life. That name became so attached to all the people who use it to call me, to refer to me. And I think something like that is true about the material of our first religion, the religion that we are raised in. It goes so deep, and it becomes a path that you just see in detail. You can just feel it, taste it. You just see in uh, you see it from we have seen it from up close, and it can do things to you. It can bring you to life. It can make you upset. It can make you feel things that it's difficult to do with other paths. Uh, I don't know what you think about that, but that return is, in that sense, for me, also significant.
I mean, I agree because it's when I realized that sometimes our original religion, or whatever original thing that we kind of began with, sometimes as we grow or mature, the fullness of that truth, we were not we were not ready for that fullness of the truth. And I think, and this goes both ways. Sometimes people cannot change because if they were to change, actually the fullness of the truth would annihilate them on the spot. It is true dramatic, it is true psychologically traumatic to actually just switch, or just to accept a new aspect of the fullness of the truth. And that's why I began to learn that there are some things that I cannot say to people, almost like the same thing like you would say to a child. Like if he fully believes in Santa Claus, if you say that Santa doesn't exist, it will annihilate him psychologically.
Yeah, it will do too much damage.
It will do too much damage, exactly. And so he has to sort of do this sort of process, this internal processing, to where he either begins to doubt or he begins to mature out of it, and have a new fullness of truth. And I think, me going through all these religions and stuff is that I needed to experience actually everything else to then kind of come back and be able to like accept Christianity. Because I think actually growing up, when I really look at it, I don't think I really fully accepted Christianity. Like I kind of was just like in this zombie mode of just like, okay, I got to go to church, I got to get baptized, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I lived a very like whatever attitude. I didn't really care about theology, whatever. It just, but then
Mm-hmm.
suddenly something happened to me, and I
Mm-hmm.
started really caring. But the thing is, I couldn't start where I began because it was just too. I just wasn't ready for it. I just didn't want to go back to it. So again, I had to do this loop, and I think that's very pivotal, because I think if I went back to Christianity, I just would have, well, immediately. If I would have went back immediately, it just would have had no significance. No significance. It would have died out
Wow.
just as fast.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I can relate to that. I can relate to that in my own experience. I was I was certainly external to to religion as I was growing up. The religion was something outside of me, and actually accepting or not accepting religion was about accepting or not accepting something that is outside of me. Now it is becoming about, like, I can't really distinguish between accepting Islam and accepting myself.
Mhm.
Those two things are so intertwined in me. And a third acceptance, accepting the world, accepting reality, the cosmos. Like those three acts are different aspects of one thing. They seem like they're aspects of one movement that I have the urge to go through. Uh, and you realize you're accepting not just, I mean, not just myself, accepting myself as a historical being who was born, was raised at a particular place in uh, on the planet with a particular language, and not just that. When I think about Islam, I also think about something that started in a particular place, in a particular time in history, within a specific culture, in a language. So it comes with accepting all of those things. And when I was growing up, that fullness, not everything was accepted, even by the religious teachers. It was like, no, no, no. The religion was spoken in Arabic not because of the historical contingencies and accidents at like that time and place, because God chose it. God was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna choose Arabic because it's the best language for my purposes, for the purposes of the present discussion. But it's not like that. It's that to say that would be to not accept the fullness of the truth. The fullness of the truth would be it's that singular, particular place in time. That's how it started. That's the life of the religion that I'm talking about. And the same with my life, the same with going back and forth with it.
Mm.
Anyways.
Now I remember what I was supposed to say.
Yeah, yeah, great, great. I told you.
Is that a long time ago? Rumi says this too, actually. Carl Jung writes in his famous red book about going your own way. And I've always, and you kind of actually clarified it for me, because I've always been kind of confused about what does that exactly mean about going your own way. But you actually entertain the idea that actually going your own way can be so identified with the actual, like, for example, like being Muslim, like this, even like you almost like you can't even separate your own identity from the path itself. Um, and so this going your own way, and Carl Jung had said this too when he's like, don't follow me, go your own way.
Mhm.
Um, I now see that that kind of saying in a new light, because Rumi also said the same thing. It was like, don't follow. It said it was something about like, don't follow your, choose your destiny or something like, it was something like that. But oh yeah, it was like live your own story or something of that nature.
Mhm.
Um, oh no, it was live your own myth. Pick your own myth, which is very Jungian in nature. Um, but I really like the idea of that, whether we call it myth or path or whatever the case may be, is that it can be so identified with you that you cannot actually discern it. That when people are like, oh, I want to find my own myth, I want to find my own path, that actually they're just trying to find themselves. And sometimes you have to do like a detour because that fullness of the truth is just too much. It's just too
Mhm.
much. Um,
Mhm.
and I've definitely experienced that. If I were to accept certain things immediately, it just, again, it would just overwhelm me. It would literally
Mhm.
cripple me.
Mhm.
So that's why I do think like some people have to stay. They have to stay Muslim, or they have to stay, right? And some people actually have to go the roundabout way. They have to leave Islam to then be like, yes, actually I am Muslim. They have to do that because the fullness of the actual truth of their origination is probably too much.
Yeah, yeah. That phrase "going their own way" actually was in the text here this time. I think you're referring to it. Uh, so I'm reading from now the top of page 55.
Okay.
The cosmos is a great collection of things, and things go their own way, not necessarily in harmony with other things on the level where they are being considered. So
Mm,
things are going their own way according to the names that are calling them.
mm,
And everything other than God is called by a divine name to come to an engendered state to which that name seeks to attach it. So being called, children are called Christian. A child is called Muslim. That's a calling. That's an invitation to
mm,
become something, to kind of engender that name. Of
mm,
course, that it's a kind of confusing beginning for a child. The fullness of the name, the fullness cannot be understood. But as we keep going, we realize what that name is and what that name is calling from us, what that myth is, and what is it about that myth that moves us. That's another thing that you talk about sometimes in relation to Rilke. Now, the myth, choosing your myth, would have something to do with realizing what moves you, what inspires you.
Yeah, it's
No.
not this willy nilly like, oh, I'm just going with what moves me. It's
Yeah.
like, no, there's like a real internalization that is actually like kind of like one directional. It's just we don't actually understand. It's kind of obscure what that direction actually is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like that. The I like the idea of like the calling, that actually it almost seems more beneficial to look at it instead of like an identity. It's like a calling, because then the calling itself becomes almost like a challenge to understand what this calling entails, what this calling requires of me, and so
Mhm.
on. Because I mean, yeah, it is hard for a child to understand that, and oftentimes they have to sort of, the only way they can comprehend it is by simply identifying with it. Yes, I've been told that I am Christian, so I am Christian.
Yeah.
But I think the thing is, we never actually grew out of that identification and transformed it into a calling,
Mhm.
which
Mhm.
I think what you made is very pivotal, because if we were to challenge our identities in terms of uh, into a calling, then we would understand that actually there's a lot of work to do.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a debate. I don't know if you have seen it. There was a debate between Richard Dawkins and a Catholic bishop. And during that debate, Richard Dawkins really thought that he won, like he destroyed him. And what the bishop said was, at some level, he said that these are the things I believe because I was raised in this tradition. And Dawkins took that to mean that, oh, I never thought about these things. I just, I'm just, I continued and became a bishop. I never really seriously considered. But he doesn't realize, Dawkins doesn't see that you can just accept things at face value and continue it. That's one way. Another way is to go on your path, become conscious, and still be able to say that this was where I was born. This is the religion that I was raised with. You can say that in two different ways. One is you have actually been on a path, that you're in relationship with this path, conscious philosophical relationship, and you're still kind of referring to that as non-interchangeable things. You can't change your own personal history with some philosophical argument. You can say, "Oh, this happens during my path," but I can give you a completely persuasive philosophical argument that anybody who hears this, even aliens, would convert to my religion. No, that can't happen. So this is what the bishop was saying. It's like your personal history has something to do with it. I can't translate that to an argument. And
Mm.
Dawkins was like, "Oh, got you. You're like, you never thought about this." Yeah.
I wonder if that was it Bishop Barron? He's like
No, I don't think so. It
he's
was
like one of the popular ones.
maybe, I don't know. I'm not sure.
But I love those. I love watching those debates.
I used to watch. Yes, hard to forget.
I used to watch them a lot when I was like becoming Muslim, because I was going through the same. Like I had this anxiety. Like I want to be sure. I want to be sure if this is the right path.
Hmm.
I mean, I just think it's funny now, like how, I was just so like, I just want to be sure. And then anytime somebody would question an aspect that I didn't understand, I'm like, oh God, I need to know now. Like, I need to understand, because if I don't understand, then they'll be like, I guess you really don't know, because
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of like I need to be prepared for that move.
yeah, yeah, I need to be prepared for that movie. Yeah.
Yeah, for that opening.
I was thinking of chess when you said that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Again, that for me it connects back to missing the point. If you expect from religion something like science, like cosmology, understanding how the stars fit together and the planetary system, that's a misunderstanding of the task of religion.
Mm.
Yeah.
Hmm. I think a lot of people actually do miss that very crucial point, because they accept a metaphysical principle, they accept it as the fullness of the truth, yet when they come across something that they don't understand, it's like just too much for them. They're like, how does that correspond how does that match up with my religion? How do we make sense of this? And there's a lot of panic and so on. Yet,
Hmm.
ironically, what I find soothing about religion is not about the intelligibility of trying to understand the metaphysical principle or trying to defend the creed, but actually just a very simple way of being, which is just doing good. And I found that for me, now this not may be applicable to everybody, but for me, it actually lifted a lot of unnecessary burden on me, because if I didn't have this principle of just, okay, actually my whole purpose of being is just to do good, just be a better person. And yet it's an active principle, it's a dialectical principle to follow, because it's like I have to constantly work
Yeah.
at being a better person. And I found so much soothing nature in that, because if I didn't have that, what I had experienced before was this. Now that I don't know, I can either get caught up in, into like this kind of nihilism where I'm like, oh, I have to, what am I doing with my life? Like,
Mm.
what if I never become anything? What if I don't become famous? What if I don't become known? Like, I start having all these existential anxieties for, like, oh, like what if I never get married? Like, what if I don't make enough money? What if I just don't do enough in this life? And I realized, like, for me, that I rather have a living that's just accepted in the terms of like, yeah, it doesn't matter if you don't make it, if you don't get accepted, if you're not loved, if you're not a lot of things. It actually allowed me to be in a state of poverty to where actually my poverty is my value, and my whole point is to be good, to give, to have this ontological charity with people. um and that was really the winning case for me. It's not anything ontological to prove God's existence. It's this ontological charity that actually allows me to live my life without being worried about my job, my career, my life, the things I've done, in terms of like, oh, am I going to be valuable enough?
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah, and that ontological charity is so much stronger than the charity that comes from being rich, like Bill Gates saying that I donate 10% of what I have, which is a big fortune. But Bill Gates depends on having his fortune to be able to be charitable like that. But you say, I rely on nothing but my poverty. So you need nothing to practice that. You need actually being rich will interfere with that probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, that you want to be the center of that uh, action, not like the your bank account. Yeah, that's a great insight. We actually can, a lot of times that life is challenging, we can use the challenges as material to practice with.
Mhm.
I completely agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I recently had a talk
Mm.
with somebody kind of like offline, and it was revolving around relationships. So I can still make a connection with the text here, but it I realized that the way he understood relationships, and I said this to him, was that it was very transactional. And it kind of hit him that it was very transactional. And I said that, you know, because again, like even the idea of like this name, being a man, has been made into like this symbol of pride and transactionality, where it's like, if, for example, like if a woman does something, the man has to start thinking about, oh, I have to maintain my pride and my worth, because if she does something that I don't allow on my own terms, then she is taking advantage of me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
She is using me. And I thought, what? Like how I was like, how paranoid this thinking is, and And this fact that, these were some of the exact words, like, oh, I want to make sure that, when this person picks me, I'm the best man. And I'm just like, that is a cause for paranoia, because if
Mm.
you think that whatever woman picks you and you saying, oh, I want her to pick me because I am the best man, you're going to soon find out about her past history. And then you're going to start doubting whether you are the best man or you are the man that she settled for. How do you determine which is what?
Mm.
Really? Or is
Yeah.
it that the man that settled is the best man? You know?
Hmm.
And you can drive yourself crazy when you start thinking about these transactional understanding of relationships. So that's why I said, for me, it's more like, being like a guest house. If somebody wants to be there, that's fine. It doesn't depreciate my value at all. If somebody wants to be a part of my life, that's fine. I don't look
Hmm.
at them as using me. Actually, if I portray myself as a guest house, I'm supposed to honor them
Hmm.
and treat them and serve them. How does that depreciate my value? And I thought, we don't think like this anymore.
Yeah. No, we don't. We don't. The what is funny about that transactional way of thinking is that it makes complete sense. It makes too much sense. We want a kind of human way of thinking about relationships that doesn't make that much sense. That there is some uncertainty in it. There's some leeway, some gray area, and that's part of it. Not like being. It sounds like sometimes we want to be omniscient. Like we want to know everything there is to know about the relationship. Like how the other person is choosing us for what reasons exactly. Having full control over that's too much. It's like a positioning yourself as both a participant in the relationship and the god of the relationship. That's two positions that, yeah, for it's too much for a human. Yeah.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, I'm not foreign to this type of thinking, because I told the guy, I said, hey, look, when I first joined the army, I almost had the same mindset, and it drove me insane. And on top of that, it made me a very bitter person. Like, it just made me so suspicious of perhaps any relationship with a woman. It just made me suspicious. And the thing is, when you start thinking like that, when you start having that transactional mentality, at that point, you're just always going to be suspicious. If it doesn't fit the criteria, you're just cutting it off before
Hmm.
it even happens, because you're like, no, I need to protect my worth, my
Hmm.
value. Somehow we assume like value depreciates in terms of ourselves, which I think is very important, because one, I'm not like a currency that somehow depreciates in value.
Yeah. If you give more of yourself, you're less valuable.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
the interpretation.
Hmm. Yeah. So you have to wait for 3 days or 5 days to call back or to text. Yeah. That's one big reason for me to read books like this. It's because they remind us of different ways of thinking, different ways of being called to participate uh, in the world with other people in relationships that are not transactional, that are based on more hopeful ideals. Yeah, actually, an expanded ontology. More things are considered in this life, in these texts, things that are not included in the transactional method. Yeah, interesting.
That's something I wanted to comment on when you said Hussein Nasser, is that
Hmm.
actually he is he's actually a perennialist. He is a perennialist. But he's taking the position of like a traditionalist, but it's not the typical conception of what traditionalist means. It's more
Mm.
like there's like this primordial tradition, which is like the perennial philosophy essentially. But yeah, this idea that I find it interesting when we've sort of lost the language, and it's so important, this language. um, the language that we use matters because and I started to see it now, is that being in a capitalist society, currency exchange transactions, it seems that it has almost leaked unconsciously into our own relationships, that now everything is transactional, and then now everything is catered towards how do you have a better transaction with the opposite sex. How do
Hmm.
you have the optimal transaction with the opposite sex? How do you get what you want while she gets what she wants,
Mm.
and all this other stuff?
Hmm.
And
How do
I,
you both get the most out of this relationship?
yes, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. Exactly.
yeah. You're absolutely right. These are the languages we use. We rehearse them. The more we rehearse them, the more we practice them, the more ingrained they become. And the more they push aside, push out of our consciousness other languages, other ways of talking and thinking. Hmm.
Yeah, because I realized that this loss of sacred language, this loss of like some of the theological language, um, it actually, I mean, for me, it was hard to deny that it actually affects the way I think, because even when we look at marriage now, we reduce it to like it being just a piece of paper. But actually, marriage is supposed to be like some divine, um, act for
Hmm.
God, you know. But actually, if you strip it of that kind of principle, what you get is, yeah, you get a piece of paper, and then on top of that, you get what people understand as like patriarchy, and how roles have to be equal. But actually, those roles and the theological understanding were not towards each other, but towards God via each other. So that's very important to understand.
Yeah, yeah. Marriage is also a path.
Mhm.
It's also a path. Yeah. We met, my wife and I recently had dinner with another couple, married couple. And there was a moment in the dinner, and the other man, the husband, the other couple, we were talking about relationships and the difficulties in them sometimes. And he said, "Yeah, well, when it doesn't work, then you get divorced." And that sounded so wrong to me. I was like, when it doesn't work, you have that path, you have that way out. It's like, I don't think that way. I don't see myself having a way out. This is a path. This is like a very non-transactional. If if you are really attached to a path, then the alternative to that path would be a kind of catastrophe. A huge misfortune, kind of like an earthquake. Something, yeah, I can imagine an earthquake would destroy my house. Yeah, that's possible, but that would be, I won't think about that all the time. And I'll say, oh, maybe I'll have an earthquake if things don't work out. Okay, that bad example. But for some people within a transactional framework, that those options become more available. Like, you think about them, it's like, oh, things are not working very well, maybe a divorce is in order. It was like, wow. So the marriage is really that piece of paper, uh, in that point of view.
Is it interesting that we compensate uncertainty with divorce? Like, I'm
Hmm.
not sure if this can work out, so, but there's always divorce. And on top of that, I recently, I've actually almost been convinced of this argument that was it Jordan Peterson is actually against cohabitation.
Hmm.
I realized a lot of how the popular culture, even like my friends and family will say, "Oh, well, you guys need to live with each other, so that way you guys know in marriage, da, da, da." But then I realized that actually this idea of the necessity of cohabitation is actually a fear of uncertainty. It says, "Oh my God, what if? What if this person is so horrible that I can't deal with them? What if?" And it really is this fear of uncertainty, and we've done everything to sort of combat that cohabitation, this getting exactly what you want out of the relationship, make sure the sex is good, make sure there can be nothing that is uncertain. Everything has to be just known.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
if it's not known, you got divorced. It's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. So basically, people want to be married before they get married.
Yeah.
Uh, and that marriage, what does that do? I don't know. Makes it official. Makes it. It's like a preview of the future. It's kind of a way of denying our time, our existence in time.
Mm.
Like wanting to go back and forth. It's like, oh, let's step into the future and see if it's working, and then we can come back and actually enter into it officially. It's like we can't really do that. We can't really go back in time. And
But I think that's the danger of I think that's the danger of the arbitrariness now
mhm,
with dating, because now we
mhm,
have all these kind of like, well, yeah, we're living to it's actually it causes more confusion with couples because a lot of them would say, yeah, I mean, we're talking, we're dating, and yet none of the rules are kind of defined. Everything is kind of almost open for debate, but it's never actually talked about. It
mhm,
leaves them in such, I would say this arbitrariness actually causes more paranoia and increases jealousy
mhm,
just because things are not defined. You can live
mhm,
with somebody. And actually, I think the problem of, women say, kind of wondering like, when is this guy going to propose to me? Actually, I think that actually roots from cohabitation. I want to say, it
mm,
actually roots from cohabitation because if you prevented cohabitation, the man might actually be more inclined to be like, yeah, I do want to live with this woman. But if you already granted the cohabitation, the necessity of what marriage involves, then, well, at this point, marriage is a piece of paper. So why go through asking?
mhm,
Why take that risk? Honestly, why take that risk? You already have everything, basically.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, by doing all those things that marriage signifies, by we are emptying the concept marriage from some of its associations, some of its meanings, and we're reducing it into something like a piece of paper.
Mhm.
Whereas we can keep it full. We can give it more meaning, or let it keep all of its meanings. Like the names enter into existence, enter into being, and they reveal something. They dictate, they govern our activity. We can allow marriage and its way of organizing us really do its job, do its work, without like analyze, like dissecting it and say, okay, I want to try this part first, and then I'll have the rest. Then I'll sign the paper.
Yeah, it goes back to what you said before. It's like, oh, I just want to taste this color, and so on. And it's more about, and I think marriage is the same principle. It's more about taking a relationship so far enough that it's
Mhm.
not about, oh, do we still love each other? It's actually more about the challenge of commitment.
Yeah,
Commit.
and it's more about the marriage actually. It becomes, at some moments in shared life, the marriage is the thing, and we are fighting for it sometimes.
Mm,
And it has primacy over the two individuals. It gives something to be inspired by, to aspire to perfect, to make it beautiful. So it's not like about me or about the other person. It's about the thing that we are trying to create.
mm. That's wonderfully put. I like the way you phrased everything because it still relates to the text. Because I know we've been going off, but
Yeah, yeah.
um, but no, it's true that actually, if we think of marriage as a name, and we have to sort of become aware of its own qualities, it's not something that we just I don't know how to phrase it. It's just something that, oh, this is just what it's called. It's just called marriage. No, marriage has uh, an ontological participation that you have to fight for. And it really resonated with, when my mother told me. She's like, a lot of people mistake the symbol of the ring. she's like, the symbol of the ring is not how much you love somebody. It's the sign that you are going to commit to this person for the rest of your life. So it's not about love anymore. It's about you saying, yeah, I'm willing to struggle with this person. You know?
Mm.
And that really hit me because I still feel like actually most women still conflate the idea of the ring of like, oh, but we're so in love and I don't understand why I don't have a ring on my finger.
Yeah. 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 Many people want to be decorated, like it's a decoration, like a badge of honor or a medal. It's like, I want a ring on this finger. I think I've done enough work to deserve a ring on this finger. It's like, no.
I've
Yeah, I
heard
know
those
what you mean.
exact words.
Oh, this was great. I'm happy that we kept the fire alive in the absence of our friends Thomas, Chitan, GOT. Hopefully, we'll have the full group together next time.
Yeah. Uh, at this point, I'm like, hey, as long as one person shows up, I can't
Yeah,
talk about this myself.
it will be funny if you like say, "Oh, so what do you think about that page?" You have to divide the divided self discussing Ibn Arabi.
I feel like one day I might do that just to humor myself. Just put like a hat on and just take it off. Take it on.
That would be amazing. But hopefully, you don't have to. Yeah, hopefully not.
All
Yeah.
right, I'll call it here.
Thank you, Javier.
All right, thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed it. All right.